This is a good reason just to stop watching the news while we figure all this out, right? Just like read books, sit in nature, talk to people. Just feel free to take a time out from the news because this is just the beginning of what's wrong with it. Hello. Welcome back to the ranch, everybody. Just ended our month-long protest documentary journey. And now I'm back at the ranch reading books for y'all. It's called Hate Inc., written by Matt Taibbi, who, for people who know, people who follow good journalism, is kind of a relic of the old days. You know, somebody who's entertaining, somebody who does their research. Matt Taibbi is like the last bastion of hope in journalism, the fourth estate, the most ruined estate I can think of, honestly.
If you turn into Republican media, what you're basically getting is a lot of stuff about Democrats and liberals and feminists and that sort of thing. And if you turn on quote-unquote liberal media, what you're getting is stuff about Trump and Republicans, and it's just the same content all day long, and it's fueling people's anxieties and fears about each other.
Everybody agrees. Fake news, lower standards, we don't know what to believe anymore. So I thought, what better way than to read a 30-year veteran of the news media talking about what he discovered about how the media is incentivized to create outrage, to create hate between different groups who are siloed and not getting any opposing views whatsoever.
The companies know that this will get people to tune in over and over again, and so they're just feeding them an endless stream of this kind of content.
Addictive.
It is. It's literally addictive.
Everything we seem to be reading and consuming is telling us to be very afraid of our neighbor, distrust their intentions, evil is real, and it's 50% of the country. And then we go outside and you have an interaction with somebody at a Safeway or somewhere, and it's usually pretty nice.
A San Francisco resident named Mike was at a Safeway over the weekend when he spotted a man pooping in an aisle.
Usually pretty nice. I've carried 3 books with me everywhere throughout my travels over the years. Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail by Hunter S. Thompson. Hunter Thompson was a colleague of my dad's when they were working at the National Observer. So I grew up steeped in this idea of like new journalism is what they called it. Hunter called it Gonzo Journalism. Instead of just who, what, where, when, why, it was like, let's get a cool style, do a bunch of drugs and throw ourselves in the story and just have some sort of a hallucinogenic journey through Dante's Inferno that we're going to write about and somehow it's going to tell the truth better. So I grew up with these legendary stories and I always thought, man, it would be cool to do that with documentary. Go out there, get in the middle of the adventure, just get dirty. That's Matt Taibbi's background too. There's very few people who would want to fight against conventional journalism because it's hard to get a job. You know, most people toe the line when you're trying to make it as a journalist, but people like Matt Taibbi and myself, I think we pull upon this idea that there's like a grand tradition of journalism. Telling the facts, not being afraid to be an opposing viewpoint, not being afraid to join the story, influence the story. These are things I believe in deeply, and it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about what I'm doing, even though it can be thankless at times. I was more and more tuned into the idea that partisan politics is a bit of a con. A lot of very serious social problems have completely bipartisan roots. One of the things we have to get over as a culture is that there are 2 distinct parties. It seems that way, right? They're always arguing, so they must have completely opposing viewpoints. However, when you watch what the 2 parties do, and this was astonishing for me after going from Bush, who I just considered to be, far fundamentalist, right-wing, literally Jesus is telling him to go to war. Then Obama comes along, he's a little more pragmatic, intellectual, you might say, and he speaks from a place that I related to a little bit more. So I got excited about Obama. But then I watched what the 2 presidents did. What? The same wars, Guantanamo Bay wasn't closed, drone strikes increased, bailouts to banks.
Bailout! The most prudent move is a bailout. Bail out the insurance company.
There were a few differences like healthcare, but the healthcare Obama proposed ended up looking a lot like what Mitt Romney proposed.
I will act to repeal Obamacare.
One problem, Governor Romney signed a very similar law in Massachusetts.
So you start to go, okay, wow, we went out there, rah, 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 but is there really any difference between the parties? And what Taibbi is saying is from 30 years of looking at serious issues, it's hard to deny that both parties kind of flow down the same channel. They go over here, they go over there, but they're both protecting financial interests. They're both status quo, you might say. Once you got into the weeds of almost any serious issue, it always seemed a lot more complicated. Military contracting corruption, money laundering, campaign finance reform, financial deregulation, torture, drone assassination, you name it. I started to believe we keep people away from the complexities of these issues by creating distinct audiences of party zealots who drink in more and more intense legends about one another. I think what Taibbi doesn't do such a good job of is presenting why embracing the truth in all of its complexity is so worthwhile. When I'm embracing the truth, my life's on fire. Like, I feel energy. So I call it the devil's energy, the truth. So maybe just start there. It's very exciting. Just get into the weeds a little bit. He starts to present the news as pro wrestling, basically. The idea was not just to make you mad, but to keep you mad, whipped up in a state of devotional anger. The bottom line, the purpose of the news today is to keep you mad, because anger is the most accessible emotion. And when you're angry, you're paying attention, you're locked in, and then you get the advertisement.
Where's your killer instinct, son? You gotta get angry. You gotta get mean. That's the only way you can play.
That's the puzzle of media, and it hasn't changed much. If you're selling the news, you really are selling entertainment, and it's been that way for a long time. You gotta get people. It used to be, as Taibbi mentions, used to be that you'd try to reach the lowest common denominator. All news was just very boilerplate, and even the anchor person was like a Ken doll, just looked like, asexual. Hi there. As he puts it, somebody you could bring home to your parents. That was the old method. Keep it low, common denominator, get a big, wide audience. But nowadays, everything is siloed. So you got the Fox News for this demographic. You got MSNBC for this demographic. So instead of being boilerplate, now people are being incredibly aggressive. This is how brilliant this model is. Imagine you have a household. The teenage kid is watching Viceland, maybe. Grandpa's watching Fox News. The parents watching MSNBC. You have 3 channels through 3 different TVs going into that house, selling advertising, and each one is making the other one angry at the other 2, so that they get in arguments and then go back to their little silos to get more evidence. So it's a horrible situation that we all live in, but at the same time, from a marketing perspective, it's kind of brilliant. This is a good reason just to stop watching the news while we figure all this out, right? Just like read books, sit in nature, talk to people. Just feel free to take a time out from the news, because this is just the beginning of what's wrong with it. But he says here, and this is sort of hopeful, there will come a time, guaranteed, when Americans pine for a powerful, neither party aligned news network to help make sense of things. That's my hope, right? At some point, it's going to get so crazy and so upside down that you're going to have an independent media. And it seemed like podcasts were becoming that for a little while, although they're getting bought up as well. So it could be anything. Hey, say what's up to the chickens. You learn more from your enemies than you do from your friends. And I think the enemies of truth out there are practicing a lot of very sophisticated dark arts that we should learn from. Truth tellers should learn from. Worse, today's media debate has left its sense of humor behind, and we now argue even minor issues as life or death matters. I think that's what it really comes down to me. Instead of being able to diffuse, slight differences lead to very physical altercations. And that's happening online and in the media all the time. We can argue tiny differences forever. A little bit of humor would be better, though. I like that he mentions that. Yeah, but this is a time of rage. What did my friend Angelo call it? The summer of hate? I'd love to see a little less hate in the media. It's like emotional arts, right? Alchemy, emotional alchemy. If everybody's angry at a dinner table, what can you do? You could argue with them, and then now you're angry, just like them. Or you can diffuse it with some humor. It's one of the few tools we have left. People who would certainly engage in courteous chats at a kid's birthday party freely trade horrific threats on Twitter. It's insane, he says. I agree. Here we get some tips, though. Like I said, we're bemoaning the media's inability to give us the truth, but at the same time, there's some tips here for how to do it right. I like this. He's talking about his dad, who was an old broadcaster, like a Will Ferrell type in the 1970s, and he had a ritual called the phone attack. When he came home at night, he would pour himself a drink, light up a Camel Unfiltered, and start going through his giant Rolodex, pulling names out at random. Then he would dial his clunky rotary phone and call people to chat. So that was a journalistic technique, and he describes how instead of just calling someone for a source or doing what most journalists now do and just Googling it, and I was a journalist, and I will confess for several years, all I was doing was Googling other stories and cut and pasting them into my own version. That's most of journalism now. He's talking about his dad's strategy of coming home, lighting up that cigarette, and just calling people on the phone, building relationships. So that's a cool way to think of a journalist. We could reach out and learn the power of calling or the phone attack. feedback. Also, ask people about whatever they want to talk about, not about one thing in particular. That's a great tip too. That's a tip I learned interviewing people. Typically, I'll go into an interview not with a series of questions. I'll just talk about what's happening immediately around us. And then that will get them comfortably opening up. And then I can ask the question I want to ask. You'd be astonished. As an interviewer, I'm astonished at the number of people I get who are willing to share their entire life story with me. If you're willing to talk about what people want to talk about, they'll share the word with you. So we're getting some tips in this book, Hate Inc., about how to do journalism right or how to get information. When you go looking for something specific, your chances of finding it are very bad. When you go looking for anything at all, your chances of finding it are very good. I like that. That's kind of my philosophy of life. I don't try to predict it too much. I just go looking for something. So let's leave on that note. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe and follow me at DevonPG on Instagram if you want to see these readings live, interact, hang out, all that good stuff.